Oh, looks like you got about 80 people so far. That's great, nice.
Okay. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning.
Karen Aronson, president of the class of 1970. I hope you're all managing to get vaccine appointments now that the CDC has lowered the age guideline to 65. One piece of Zoom housekeeping. Please mute yourselves so that we don't have distracting noises. We will be recording this session and it will be available at some point. We are delighted to have you join us today for our 6th class of 1970 environment talk. Today, we have Earl Withycombe, who lives in California and works on air quality issues there. They've had big air quality issues with all their wildfires. He was a course 16 major, but worked for several years in construction and a variety of other odd jobs before moving into a small government job that included running an air pollution control district for Sierra County, which then had a population of about 3,600. I'll let Earl tell you the rest. He'll talk for about 20 or 25 minutes, and then we will open the floor to questions, comments, and discussion. If you would like to speak, please indicate that in the chat function, which is now working, and we will try to go in the order that people sign up. We will also try to let people who haven't spoken talk before giving others a second chance. So again, please make sure your settings are on mute, and let me turn the floor over to my classmate, Earl. Thank you very much. And thank you, Nancy.
Good morning, everyone. This presentation will cover some of the air quality trends occurring in California, but since Karen was intrigued by my career path, this will be part educational and part entertainment. When, oh, there it goes. In 1970, the year we graduated, the aeronautics industry laid off 60,000 engineers. That was between Boeing and Lockheed combined. So as a result, the bottom had fallen out of my new profession. After graduating in September of 1970, my wife, who had been my high school sweetheart, my 18-month-old daughter, and I loaded up in our van and drove back to California, to the area where we were raised. That was Sierra County. Sierra County is in Northern California. It's sort of at the northern end of the gold rush belt on the western slopes of the Sierra. It currently has a population of about 3,000 people scattered over about 600 square miles. It laps the crest of the Sierras about 15 miles north of Lake Tahoe. I graduated from the local high school on the western side of the county in the class of 7. And as a result, I'm firmly convinced that I was admitted to MIT on the basis of geographical distribution. No one else from a tiny county in California, I think, applied. When I returned to Sierra County, I worked construction to make a living, digging ditches, banging nails, and digging graves for extra money. Because I wanted to contribute something from my education to my community in return for the benefits they gave me and enabled me to attend MIT, I started volunteering time where community needs were the greatest. And these involved fire protection, primarily, and medical services. I spent 22 years as a volunteer fireman, leader of the emergency medical response team, and as a fire commissioner in the Sierra City Fire Protection District. During my tenure as a fire commissioner, a colleague of mine who's shown with me in the photograph in the upper right went through 2 annexation processes that enabled the district, the fire district, to be expanded in size by a factor of 100 and increased its tax revenues by 500%. The fire department, as an annual fundraiser, put on a melodrama, usually at the end of winter when cabin fever was at its height. People were desperate for entertainment. In the photograph in the upper right, I played both the villain and the hero, who were twins in the script, and had to fall through the trap door in the ceiling at the upper right that's labeled Saloon. During that time, a group of residents that I helped lead was successful in 1973 in getting the federal government to designate Western Sierra County as a medically underserved area and fund a National Health Service Corps site that became the Western Sierra Medical Clinic. Previous to that, there was no professional medical care in the western part of the county for about a decade before that. A picture of the clinic appears in the lower right. The map at the left shows the boundaries, current boundaries of the Sierra City Fire District, right there in the middle of Sierra County. In 1973, I was successful in landing a job where I used my brain to make a living instead of my back. I was hired by the County Sierra to be the Air Pollution Control Officer, the coordinator of the Office of Emergency Services, the Public Guardian, and the Deputy Public Administrator. I was managing 4 small county departments as the sole employee. At the time, the county only had a total of 85 employees. As the Air Pollution Control Officer, my job to bring lumber mill emission sources into compliance with state and local regulations. Pictured on the upper left is a teepee burner that used to fill the Sierra Valley on the eastern side of the county every morning with a blanket of smoke that from above looked like fog. During that period of time, I worked with the air pollution control officers in 8 other counties on the west slopes of the Sierras to convince the California Air Resources Board to realign the boundaries of air basins in northern and central California to form the new Mountain Counties Air Basin, which is shown in light green here in this map on the right, on the basis that we had common economies and common emission sources to deal with. In that effort, I realized, I came to learn that I was the only staff person in the 9 counties, those 9 counties, that had an engineering background. In 1975, the Air Resources Board sent a letter to all the rural districts in the state insisting that they secure engineering expertise to properly evaluate applications for new industrial facilities and troubleshoot and inspect for compliance the existing facilities for compliance with local and state air pollution regulations. And as a result, I started getting inquiries from my colleagues in the other mountain counties area and entered into a contract with that region of 9 counties to provide technical services. That enabled me to set up a solo consulting practice, and I operated under that contract for about 13 years, providing a spectrum of technical, administrative, and lobbying services. In 1978, the county supervisor in the community I was living and had grown up in announced that he wasn't going to seek another term on the Board of Supervisors, and I threw my hat in the ring. I won election and served for almost 8 years on the Board of Supervisors, but as a progressive in a fairly conservative county, I faced 3 recall attempts. because I only had 500 registered voters in my district, I used to win elections by 5 to 20 votes. My nickname in the County Supervisors Association was Landslide. For political reasons, I was elected to be chairman of the Board of Supervisors the day I was first seated, and then elected for a second consecutive year as chairman, all contrary to the traditional rotation scheme. I was quite honored by that. In my work as the air basin engineer for Mountain County's air basin, my primary duty was to evaluate new facility designs for compliance. During the latter 1970s and first half of the 1980s, industrial growth in this area was driven by the price of gold and a piece of federal legislation that grew out of the first Arab oil embargo of 1974. Between 1975 and 1980, the price of gold rose by a factor of 10. This caused a latter-day gold rush in the Sierra Nevada, but mining methods in this gold rush were far different from those employed by the 49ers. In the current scenario, these mines are excavated, huge pits are excavated over a limited short period of time, 7 to 8 years. And the ore is basically processed by cyanide heap leach to dissolve the gold and capture it through an electrowinning process. There were several of these mining operations that commenced and were completed during my term as the air basin engineer. A photograph on the upper right shows one of these pits, and the chart overlaying it shows the fluctuations in the price of gold during that period. Also, in 1978, the federal government, as I mentioned, passed the Public Utilities Regulatory Policy Act, PURPA, which created significant tax incentives for the construction and operation of non-fossil fuel electrical generation. The picture on the lower right is a picture of a freestanding wood-fired power plant in that area. Most of the wood-fired power plants, however, were constructed on the premises of existing lumber mills, a photograph of one of which is in the lower left. In the upper right is during that period, there were some unique projects that crossed my desk. In the upper right is a photograph of the pit of the Calaveras asbestos mine. For 40 years, asbestos was mined and processed from this pit until about 1980, when the market generally collapsed and the operation closed. At the same time, schools started stripping asbestos out of their ceilings, and landfills were adverse to taking this hazardous material. So this pit was converted to an asbestos-only landfill. It is still in operation and now is about 1/4 filled with asbestos-containing waste. One of my proudest achievements as a county supervisor was to sponsor the passage of a bill in the California legislature that created a locally controlled groundwater management district. Contrary to what other states in the Western United States have done, where groundwater is regulated by a state commissioner, California heretofore had no groundwater management except for a few statutorily adjudicated basins. A landowner, actually a Hollywood film producer, bought a ranch in Sierra Valley in the eastern half of Sierra County and put in deep pivot wells and started depleting the upper perched aquifer, which was used for stock watering and domestic water in that valley. And mom and pop ranchers in that area became very concerned about protecting their water supply. The solution was to go to the legislature and ask for authorization to create a groundwater management district. This would have been very controversial, but we managed to get this bill through the legislature without a single opposing vote, because the longtime champion of groundwater management in the legislature was retiring. The legislature gave him this bill as a going away gift, and the scope of the bill was very limited just to this one valley. This occurred in 1980, 35 years actually, before Governor Jerry Brown was able to persuade the California legislature to require groundwater management on a statewide basis. In 1988, I moved out of the mountains to Sacramento and began to work for Sierra Research, an air pollution consulting company with much better heeled clients than rural county governments. I made the move to earn enough money to put 4 daughters through college. In the 18 years that I spent at Sierra Research, I worked mostly on the same kinds of resource extractive facilities that I grew to understand in the mountains. These projects, however, were of a much larger scale than I had seen before. The photo in the upper left is the iron ore pit at Eagle Mountain in Southern California that Kaiser Steel's Fontana, the steel mill, pulled ore from World War II up through the early 1980s. It was proposed to become the largest landfill in the nation, capable of receiving 40% of the garbage generated by the County of Los Angeles over a 70-year period. That project didn't move forward to fruition. Several other proposals for this pit have been offered, but none have been funded. The aerial photo on the lower left is a large aggregate quarry near Monterey, California, which I secured an air permit for to construct a mile-long conveyor belt and an overburden placement area that would keep the mine going, keep the quarry going for another 30 years. The photo in the upper right is of an electrical generating station in the Sierra foothills that burned waste lignite and later wood waste in a sensitive wine region. And that was an interesting project to try to make sure that there was no emissions that adversely affected grape production, for instance, in that nearby wine region. In the lower left is a plot plan for a soon-to-be operating composting facility in the San Joaquin Valley that'll be the largest in the state. Because of my experience in dust control, I was tapped at Sierra Research to develop technical analyses in support of air quality plans for dusty areas that didn't comply with federal air quality standards like Phoenix, Las Vegas, San Joaquin Valley, and Coachella Valley. This shows an aerial photograph of Phoenix showing here along the center, the course of the Salt River, and a series of sand and gravel operations in this riverbed that, together with large vacant lots, unpaved truck yards, and other similar dust sources, made it difficult for Phoenix to attain the EPA air quality standards for particulate matter. After my daughters graduated from college, I decided I didn't need to work consultant's hours anymore and got a job at the California Air Resources Board in 2006, working on windblown dust control. I also made the move to top off my state retirement plan, which was a much better investment than continuing to contribute to a 401k in the private sector. The focus of my ARB work has been the control of windblown emissions of PM10, dust particles smaller than 10 microns in diameter. The image in the upper left compares 10 micron particles and also the red 2.5 micron particles with the size of a human hair. The median size of dust particles is about 4 microns, and so PM10 is the air quality standard that is usually violated when there's excessive dust in the air. Smoke particles have a median diameter of less than a micron, and so the federal PM 2.5 standard is used to assess acceptable levels of smoke in the ambient air in this country. The image at the upper right is a schematic of how windblown dust is created. When wind velocities begin increasing, sand particles begin bouncing across bare soil surfaces. And every time a sand particle lands, it fractures fine soil agglomerates. Then that releases fine soil particles that are then entrained by the turbulent airflow over the surface to form dust plumes. So the secret to windblown dust control is to either stabilize or capture sand particles from saltating across these bare soil surfaces. The image at the lower left is a photograph of the surface of Owens Lake, an untreated surface. The image in the lower right is a plot plan, a map of Owens Lake, showing in dark blue the total area that has now been covered by the dust controls. Since the city of Los Angeles drained the lake in 1927, courts have determined that they're responsible for controlling dust on the lake. The application of dust controls over now 48 square miles has cost the city of Los Angeles a little over $2 billion. It's an expensive proposition. In this case, those costs were driven by the time requirements of the Federal Clean Air Act for this area to reach attainment. Those of you who remember the movie Chinatown, that was about LADWP's efforts to secure and transport water from the Owens Valley to the city of Los Angeles. Owens Lake is now very close to attaining the federal air quality standard for PM10. The photo in the upper left shows an Owens Lake dust plume in 2010, 8 years after initiation of dust control projects. Dust emission rates at Owens Lake are estimated from the mass of sand flux near the surface as measured by one of 100 saltation stations like the one shown in the upper right. Dust control methods at Owens Lake include salt-tolerant vegetation, shallow flooding, and 4-inch thick gravel blankets as shown in the photos at the bottom. One of the other windblown dust areas over which I've been assigned technical oversight is the Salton Sea. The sea has a unique history in this entrepreneurial state, formed as a result of poorly planned irrigation diversion canals along the Colorado River. It filled a desert depression that sits right on top of the San Andreas Fault in 1905. For 18 months, the total flow of the Colorado River flowed into this depression. The sea is a terminal lake, as the bottom is 278 feet below sea level. The bottom of the Salton Sea is only 4 feet higher than the lowest point in Death Valley. In a desert with an annual evaporation rate of 6 feet per year, the sea is primarily sustained by agricultural drainage flows from the Imperial and Coachella valleys. As a result of a water transfer agreement with thirsty coastal Southern California, the sea is shrinking and will continue to do so until 2047. The map at the left shows the shrinking shoreline and expanses of lake bed that will be exposed. The photo in the upper right shows some of this exposed lake bed, and the photo in the lower right shows a dust storm from adjacent desert lands. In addition to dust that's beginning to be seen coming off of the exposed lake bed. We have significant other dust sources in this region, which include windblown dust off of adjacent desert lands, vacant parcels within communities in the two valleys, and windblown dust coming off of agricultural fields. The expansive lake bed that will be exposed in 2047 will be about double the area that's currently covered by dust controls at Owens Lake, just as a comparison. Because of the potential cost of Owens Lake controls applied through the Salton Sea, research continues in the development of more cost-effective controls here. These controls include one-time planting of salt-tolerant grasses, shown in the photo at the left, deep tilling down to 4 feet, and native brush cultivation as shown in the images on the right. This work is complicated by the complex land ownership patterns around the sea and local suspicion of state efforts. That local suspicion is generated by the ever-present fear of the Imperial Irrigation District, which has water rights to 3/4 of all the water California is entitled to that comes out of the Colorado River. The Imperial Irrigation District is deeply suspicious of people trying to steal their water. And so it's an interesting political situation to work in. The same droughts that have reduced flows in the Colorado River and other sources of Southern California water have severely impacted the forests of California. Today, these forests harbor over 150 million dead trees. You can see in the photos on the right some of these impacts. The photo on the map on the left in red shows high hazard areas where the dead trees are located. Fires in these forests now grow at rates 10 times faster than when I fought fire in Sierra County in the 1970s. Where we could get to a fire in about an hour and limit it to 15 acres, an outbreak now in these forests will grow to 200 acres in the first hour. Unusual fire behavior like fire nados that turn soil into glass are becoming the new normal in bad fire years. The fire situation has also created some unusual panoramas in a state known for scenic beauty. The shots of fires in 2018 at the top are examples of the ferocity at which these fires burn. In the lower panel are photos from 2020 of smoke plumes in the San Francisco area. Here, the smoke blew in solid layers at an elevation above ground level, resulting in the surreal orange images that reminded local residents of the apocalypse movie Blade Runner. The image at the lower right was captured from a short video that will be running as my Zoom background later in this presentation. This fire situation has also, when the valleys and the coastal regions of the state are inundated with smoke from mega fires, such as those we saw in 2018 and 2020, personal protection is the order of the day. Assessment of regional smoke gradients is now facilitated by maps of PM 2.5 concentrations recorded by both regulatory monitoring stations and networks of low-cost community monitors. The map at the upper left shows PM 2.5 concentrations in the San Francisco and Sacramento areas near the tail end of the 2020 fire season. The color arrangement here shown here follows the EPA coding system for clean and bad air. When you can smell smoke in the air, it's time to grab a mask. The N95 mask shown in the upper right works as well blocking PM 2.5 smoke particles as it does COVID-19 droplets. I bought 2 boxes of these masks during the campfire in 2018 and have half of one box left. One mask, now worn whenever I walk out my front door, will last me about 2 months before beginning to disintegrate. The air quality map in the upper left is generated by signals from low-cost Purple Air monitors, just one of several brands available. These monitors sell for, the outdoor monitors sell for about $250. The Purple Air monitor, the outdoor monitor on my front porch is shown in the lower left, next to an indoor Purple Air monitor in the center that I use to assess indoor quality, air quality. And next to it, a handheld PM 2.5 monitor that I use for surveying around my house. I use the signal from the outdoor unit to guide my outdoor activities and protection. The indoor and handheld units tell me when I either need to wear a mask indoors or turn on my air purifiers. These are images of two of my air purifiers. The unit on the left is a commercial unit that retails for about $350. This unit will clean a single room from the purple zone, about 150 micrograms per cubic meter of PM 2.5, to the green zone, 10 micrograms per cubic meter in about half an hour. To do so, the room must be closed, all doors and windows shut. The unit on the right is a homemade air purifier that is constructed by taping a high-efficiency HVAC filter to the front of a box fan. This arrangement costs about $60 in materials, can be assembled in about 15 minutes, and cleans a single room at the same speed as a commercial unit. The photo on the right was taken at the end of the 2020 wildfire smoke season. The darkened portions of the filter are entirely due to indoor smoke capture. I use this unit to initially clear my home office or bedroom before occupancy, and then use the commercial unit at low speed to keep the room clean. The box fan makes too much noise for Zoom calls and sleeping. Otherwise, I'd probably use it continuously. That's my presentation. I thank you for listening. This was a quick tour through some of the highlights of my career in California air quality, and now I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Earl. That was an interesting talk that covered a lot of ground. People should feel free to put questions in chat, but let me lead off with a couple. First of all, it struck me, a couple of things struck me. MIT at this point is, its motto is essentially making the world a better place. And I think they should be very proud of you. It's seems like that's what you've been doing ever since you left MIT, starting with your lobbying to get a health place out in your rural county. But the other thing that strikes me is that an MIT education is about learning how to take problems that they haven't given you formulas for solving, and that it appears that you've been very good at tackling a whole range of problems and just figuring out what to do. Could you talk a little about, what it's been like to be in your shoes and encounter whatever, and how you go about figuring out what it is you should do, even aside from the politics of how to solve it?
Growing up in a very rural area taught me a sort of self-reliance and a curiosity in ways of fixing problems. In a community of 175 people where I grew up, the nearest hardware store was a dozen miles and a half-hour drive away. Whenever we needed to fix something around the house, we took the materials that we had and basically constructed a solution. That sort of started me on the path of tinkering, I guess, to affect solutions with the materials and the tools at hand. Growing up in a former gold rush camp, provided the opportunities to do a lot of outdoor exploration, hiking around an area that was very rugged. The western half of the county is more vertical than horizontal. And so I became pretty self-reliant in exploring those mountains as a kid, and that gave me a lot of self-confidence. When I went to MIT, I was I was floored by the intellectual caliber of my classmates, and I didn't excel grade wise, but I had a lot of fun in the aeronautics department, especially working in their lab on the lab required lab project that I earned a Louis de Flore award for creativity. And so that curiosity, that interest in solving problems with the tools at hand, helped move me through the career that I've just described.
Thanks. Okay, so we've got some questions, and I've got more if we run out. Bob Hagman, unmute yourself. Bob Hagman there?
Yeah, I didn't know I was going to be required to unmute.
Sorry. You want to show video too or not?
Okay, so I asked about the thresholds you use for doing various things for the PM 2.5s. I've been looking at the purple air stuff for the last year after the disaster and the smoke season this year, plus a couple of years ago when we had enormous smoke in the Bay Area from the fires. And the descriptions I see online are just pretty so general that they aren't operable. I don't know, don't go out hiking when it's 100. So what thresholds do you use for doing various things?
Well, lately I don't have to worry about that because we're all indoors all the time because of COVID. But in 2018, when we had the fires north of your area and the Camp Fire, for example, in the Sierra foothills. If the outdoor concentration exceeded the 24-hour federal standard of 35 micrograms per cubic meter, I would make sure to wear a mask outside. The N95 mask that I like is a 3M and has the exhaust valve, which makes it easier to wear than the solid N95 masks. They're not allowed these days in hospitals or other indoor areas because although they do provide protection for the wearer, they don't provide protection for the people around the wearer. But I like those, and so back in 2018, I used the 35 microgram standard as the cautionary threshold for reducing outdoor activities.
Thanks. Nancy, do you want to remove the screen sharing and put the whole gallery up? I'm just wondering if time to show people. Next, Rod Walker, unmute. And then we'll have Jan after that.
Yeah, sorry, Earl, I love the presentation, fascinating. What an interesting career. What can you tell us about the different sizes of particulates and how they affect the human body as when you breathe them or not?
Well, yeah. In air pollution, we deal with basically 3 sizes, but only 2 of which are currently regulated by air quality standards. PM, originally when EPA established air quality standards, we used an air quality monitor that was a glorified vacuum cleaner. It had a motor and a blower, suction blower that pulled air through an 8x10 quartz filter, and we We weighed the filter before and after to calculate the mass of particulate collected. The design of the instrument meant that we were collecting particles larger or smaller than 30 microns in size. And we called that total suspended particulate. EPA, through epidemiological work that they funded, found that the smaller particles were responsible for health effects. And in fact, particles larger than 15 microns are not inhaled, but are instead caught in the mouth or the front of the nose. Only the particles that were smaller than 10 microns they found made it to the upper respiratory system, where they are primarily responsible for the diseases like asthma and chronic bronchitis. Further research over time found that only particles smaller than 2.5 microns made it all the way to the alveoli, the air sacs in the lung. And it was found that those particles correlated better with deep lung diseases and emphysema, COPD. And as a result, then EPA established the 2.5 standard. We have found since then that high temperature combustion sources like vehicle exhaust and even the exhaust from what are referred to as clean vehicles fired by natural gas produce substantial quantities of ultrafine particles, smaller than about 100 nanometers, a tenth of a micron. These particles agglomerate within a few minutes in the air, but for those people who live within about 500 feet of a freeway or major roadway, it's believed that those particles, and those particles are small enough to be absorbed through the walls of the alveoli into the bloodstream. We don't have any epidemiological data to better correlate the relationship between ultrafine particle exposures and health effects, but we know from the physical characteristics and physiological characteristics of ultrafine exposure that it's believed that the composition of these particles, especially those that contain iron and some other metals, basically contribute to inflammation of veins and arteries that lead to the formation of blood clots and cardiopulmonary diseases. As a result, EPA is increasingly focused on quantifying the health effects of ultrafine exposure. And when we're able to do that, EPA will probably establish some emission standards for that size range. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. And thanks for whoever just unscreen shared. Fun to see people.
Thanks.
So next will be Jan, and then after that will be David L. So
Hi.
Jan.
Those the open pit mine pictures look pretty dramatic. I wonder about restoration, environmental restoration that's possible or going on for those, or are they just left open?
No, environmental restoration follows basically is limited by the funding that these facilities are required to put into a restoration fund. Many of the deep pits had been filled with water and become recreational facilities. That's probably the cheapest reclamation method for the deeper pits, for example.
Jan,
Yes. I attended a talk last year at the University of Arizona where they're the talk involved development of a biodegradable polymer to water the dirt roads leading to mines. Currently, they have to apparently water those roads multiple times a day, and they're looking for substances that could require watering every few days, or perhaps as short a time as every week, or perhaps every 2 weeks. Do you have any insight in terms of the development of those types of products?
Yes, in fact, there are roughly 6 different classes of dust palliatives that are used in the construction and mining industries, and those range from compounds like magnesium chloride, which is the favored dust suppressant on mine haul roads, to polymers, as you mentioned. These products have been on the market for 30, for 30 years, for example. Mines that use mag chloride apply this material by scarifying the surface, roughening it down to about an inch, applying mag chloride, and then taking a roller to firm up the surface. Mag chloride absorbs moisture from the air, and as a result, it keeps the soil particles at a relatively elevated moisture content that keeps them from easily blowing. And mag chloride treated road, typically, even in Arizona weather and Southern California water, only needs to be watered once a day, for example, to add additional water.
Thanks. David L. Unmute if you're still there. Yeah. Okay, we could go on to Will. Did you want to make a comment? Will Roberts, Paula, Barta?
David,
Oh, David, you're talking now. Okay. But we're not hearing you. You seem to be unmuted, but.
Huh. Let me turn up the volume.
Yes, that helps.
That helped. I'm sorry.
Start again, turn it all the way.
You've demonstrated personal concern about indoor air quality at your home by installing monitors and filtration devices. Is that a special case because of where you live in California, or do you feel that those of us who live elsewhere in the country, for instance, on the East Coast, should also have concerns about indoor air quality?
Compared to the East Coast, we have unique particulate problems, both in dust levels and smoke levels. Most of the East Coast particulate is resulting from secondary aerosol formation in the air, where solid particles are formed from photochemical reactions of exhaust gases from vehicles, industrial sources, etc. But the levels that you experience in the East Coast are lower than, well, especially what we see during the fire season. I have to say that I don't really follow my monitors or have to run my air filters, purifiers, except during these fire seasons that we're beginning to see with regularity in California. And so I don't think that you need to worry that much about indoor air quality with respect to particulate levels. The East Coast has a pervasive ozone problem, however, that's region-wide, generated by emissions from primarily coal-fired power plants. And there's only limited opportunities for self-protection from ozone concentrations. And as a result, I can't think off the top of my head of a way to reduce ozone concentrations indoors or outdoors, short of reducing the contributing emissions. But it pays to, look at the air quality forecasts and alerts, sign up for an alert if your local agency, the state of New Jersey, issues them for high ozone readings. And then if those occur, the recommendations are not to do any heavy exercising outdoors at elevated ozone levels. Spend most of your time indoors. That's about the most you can do.
Thank you.
Sure.
There are a couple of people who've put comments in, but there's a question. Bob Armstrong? Unmute.
Hi, Earl. What a great talk. One of the things that I always wonder about is the immense difference in the response to getting COVID among various of my friends who are all of our ages, and that there are some people who don't seem to be seriously affected, and other people who within days they're in the hospital on a ventilator. And I can't help but wonder if there's something common among everyone who is so seriously struck down. And so I'm wondering, particle size is something none of us know much about, and yet you're talking about different particle sizes and what happens and how our lungs treat them and what affects us and what doesn't affect us. And I'm just wondering if people are looking at that. And right now, California looks like you're being hit so hard. And might this be related?
There are groups initially when COVID became occupied the news full time last winter, a year ago. Groups started looking at this, and in fact, I think some MIT researcher using a special lighting scheme has demonstrated that a common sneeze produces liquid particles that'll drift 20 up to 20 feet, but most of the particles fell out at about 6 feet. And that's one of the reasons for the 6 feet of separation standard that we have today. There's a group at VMI, the Virginia Military Institute, who's also doing a lot of work identifying droplet size and transport distances that I'm aware of. All of that research suggested to us that the wearing of masks, even cloth masks, not the N95 masks that I wear for ultimate protection, are effective in blocking the droplets that can be transported up to 6 feet from somebody talking loudly. And so there is work being done. Back to your first question, I've wondered the same thing. Is there something about our physiology or genetic baseline that makes some of us more vulnerable to the impacts of COVID? And I think those answers will be teased out, but only after a few years of significant research into how COVID affects various systems in the body. I don't think we can speculate much at this point on the relationships that we both are wondering about. But I'm eager to see what the research shows in the next few years.
Will Roberts, did you want to say something? Unmute if you.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, struggling with the unmute there.
You want to
25.
turn on video or not?
Yep.
No?
We can hear you.
Okay. About 25 years ago, I worked with a firm that owned a number of large distribution warehouses out near San Bernardino. Even back then, we had such a dust problem. Tenants, we ended up working with a local small firm that would come out and think it was parachute fabric around the vents on the skylights. So on a 250,000 square foot warehouse, we had like 200 of these things. So it would take a couple of weeks to do them all. And you'd have to come back and do them again a couple of months later. Very expensive problem commercially. And I'm thinking about what the costs are related to this particular matter in the air, which are not necessarily related to what we breathe, but other costs like damages to buildings, manufacturing processes, and other places which are more or less sensitive.
Will, we can only hear about half of what you're saying. You're fading in and out.
Okay, so he wrote a comment saying that he used to work with a commercial real estate firm that had large distribution warehouses near San Bernardino, and they had to jury rig cloth dust filters around skylight louvers over several 250,000 square foot roofs because of dust damage to the goods in the warehouses. And he said it was a serious problem for many businesses. So I don't know if it still is, but, and I don't know if there are better solutions. Do you?
Dust was a significant problem in the San Bernardino area, Coachella Valley area, where Palm Springs is located. Regulations adopted by the South Coast Air Quality Management District have substantially reduced dust emissions from the more significant sources. And now that area is pretty much attains the federal standards. In the case of warehouses and other similar facilities, typically I think the ultimate solution is to make sure that any air brought into a structure like that is filtered, and it's better to sort of keep skylight louvers closed and install air movers that have filters installed that bring air into a facility that's clean, for example. But it's not obvious to me that that's still a problem or issue, for instance, in the San Bernardino area.
Let me throw in another question here. When I called you initially, I think in November, as the wildfires were raging, you were way too busy to talk to us. What were you doing was there anything you could do at that point to help people with very polluted air?
At that time, which was the height of the 2020 fire season here, I was giving presentations on exactly the information that I gave you about ways to monitor air quality, both outdoors and indoors, and ways to protect yourself outdoors and indoors. I was working with people in disadvantaged communities, showing them my homemade air filter purifier, for example, and demonstrating it. And that was the kind of work, putting on presentations to small local groups, especially in environmental justice areas, heavily burdened with other sources of pollution here in the Sacramento area.
Sounds good. I'm glad the fires are pretty much out at this point. Phil Nelson.
Yes, thanks. My question comes from your comment about the Salton Sea water problems, and also your discussions on Phoenix. And throughout your career, it sounds like you've attended many meetings, and some of them must have been contentious. So I was wondering if you have some favorite techniques you have for moderating and dealing with contentious meetings.
Early in my volunteer career as a volunteer fireman, I taught first aid classes and CPR classes. And as a result of that, I was given some basic instruction in presentational styles. Those include basically moving as you're talking in front of an audience, walking among them, for instance, and providing opportunities for people to ask questions, to make these presentations more interesting and stimulating. I've used those techniques at times in public presentations. I have to say that, yes, I have been involved in some contentious presentations, but came away, I think, with the respect of the audience. I tried to be as candid. I try to be in my presentations as candid as possible. Sometimes I'm not able to do that as fully as I'd like because of political sensitivities by my employer. But I found that being candid and doing your homework, having the answers to the questions you think are going to be asked, and paying attention and listening carefully to the questions that are directed to me, I think have served me well in being able to sort of manage, not so much manage expectations, but at least come away with a feeling that I provided some value to my audience, and I get out of there with a shirt on my back.
I wondered if you wore Hawaiian shirts and shades and whether that loosened people up.
I started wearing Hawaiian shirts to work when I was at Sierra Research, a consulting company. And I continue to wear Hawaiian shirts every day in the warm season here, which is every week that the peak temperatures are above 70 degrees, which is about 6-7 months out of the year here in the Sacramento area. I started wearing Hawaiian shirts for the comfort, and they had pockets, which is what every engineer needs. And it was one of the reasons I was attracted to them. But I wore them to try to convince my colleagues to not take themselves so seriously. I wore jeans and Hawaiian shirts, and that's my dress uniform. When the temperatures in Sacramento hit 100 degrees, on those days I wore shorts to work and with my Hawaiian shirts. Over time, I started buying Hawaiian shirts in thrift stores for about $8 a piece, and I've got about 130 of them now. I pretty much stopped buying them because I can't wear them out fast enough. I'll die still with a collection that my kids will pass off to some thrift store. But yeah, I enjoy them. I tell people I'm growing up in the 60s or coming to age in the 60s. I'm an inveterate flower child, and I like the flower patterns. Hawaiian shirt.
Do we have somebody named S. Heinsohn? And does that person want to talk? Or Scheinson? If so, unmute. Otherwise, we will go on. The next would be Tom Garreau. Hi, Tom.
Yes, hi. Sorry, actually, I didn't have a question. I was just posted the link to global real-time maps of P2.5. So I put that link there. It's on Windy, which is a really great weather site with tremendous computational power. So it makes projections. And if you go actually to the P2.5, it'll make projections for the next week or so.
Right.
And so I was following the wildfires this summer with that because you'll see peaks with several of, with ozone, you'll see peaks with aerosols, but you'll see peaks with NO2 and some SO2, it depends what's burning. But the P2.5 was actually the best indicator of fires because Windy also has a site that shows you real-time maps of forest fires from satellite radiometer measurements. It's a great site. And you can really see a lot of the stuff happening pretty much close to real time. It's amazing. So that I just wanted to point that out, that I thought it I'm sure Earl knows.
Thank you for mentioning that. I do have a slide in the local presentations I gave last few months ago that have a list of websites, and Windy is one of them. Yeah, that's a very good site. Thanks for mentioning that.
So Will Roberts has a question, another question, but we had, Will, do you want to try or shall I
I'm
read
gonna
it?
try again. I don't know. Do you have sound for me?
Go
Yes,
ahead.
we can hear you.
Question basically concerned fireplaces. They're popular. They're more ornamental now than for heat. But are there any serious issues with fireplaces that we've been living with for hundreds of years? It's just nice.
No?
You're fading in and out, Will.
Will, I'm going to read your question. It's in
Okay.
chat for everybody. He said he recently read that there is consideration being given to health warnings being put on wood stoves in the United Kingdom. As someone who enjoys his traditional wood fireplace in his 1895 vintage home, how concerned should his family be about indoor air quality?
Well, let me mention this. Raising a family in Sierra County, in the Sierras of California, I heated with wood because it was far cheaper than heating with either propane or electricity. I used to notice an accumulation of fine particulate on horizontal surfaces in my house and on the tops of drapes, for example. At the end of the heating season, I'd see this fine black layer of black particulate. After I spent a few years in the air pollution business and was studying the health effects of particulate inhalation, I began to realize that particulate was loaded with polyaromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, that have significant carcinogenic characteristics. And I began to realize that I may be poisoning my family. And I then, because I was heating with a fireplace, I installed an efficient wood stove at the time, but I still found that there was accumulations of particulate over the winter months, and realized that every time I would open the door to the wood stove to put more wood in, a puff of smoke would come out, and that was as dangerous as the smoke that infiltrated from even a fireplace with glass doors. I ultimately scrapped those and put in a propane heater for health reasons. I have to say that here in the United States, residential wood combustion was a primary driver of non-attainment situations here in the United States in winter months, in areas along the northern third of the United States. As a result, the New England states, and especially the states in the northwest portion of the United States, Montana, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and even California, has significant controls or require the use of EPA certified clean wood stoves. And EPA continues to use advances in clean burning wood technologies to force the emission standards for new wood stoves lower and lower. In Fairbanks, Alaska, for example, they have the highest PM 2.5 levels in the nation currently that occur entirely as a result of wood combustion in the winter. And they've had to consider adopting some fairly draconian standards. Many communities that still have elevated PM 2.5 levels from wood combustion currently use a burn, no burn day regulation, where whenever the PM 2.5 levels reach about the 24-hour standard, they put out an alert and all wood burning has to cease, except in those units where wood heat is the only form of heat, and the property owner is lower income and can afford to put in a backup heating systems, for example. But yes, residential wood combustion remains an issue in the colder areas of this country during the winter.
Thank you. So it is about 10 after 12. We will bring this to a close. Our next environment session will be February 10th. It will be Cynthia Bloomquist, who some of you may remember ran for the ugliest man on campus and won. She's going to talk about how she's landscaped and maintained 2 acres on Martha's Vineyard. It's very interesting, and her place was recently featured in a magazine. And somebody said, why don't we do this as an environment talk? So we will send out notices. Earl, somebody just asked for your email address. It is in the alumni directory, but you want to offer it?
I'll put it in the chat box.
Thank you very much. We have recorded the session. At some point, it will be available online. We're busy figuring out where these things are going to be posted. So stay tuned, but I think one is posted and one is in the wings, and this will come along. So thank you all for being here. Thanks to Earl for a fascinating talk. I used to think earthquakes were the big danger in California, but now it's earthquakes and drought and wildfires and dust, not just Oklahoma, but California. So Earl to the rescue, and thank you for talking with us. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Nancy for helping us put this on.
Thank you for organizing these, Karen.
See you in a month.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. And get your shots. Sign up.